I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Patricia Erbe. She is the author of an incredible book that focuses on the importance of connecting with your students. It's called Building Bonds with Learners, the Teacher-Student Relationship Model. Oh, so much to learn. You're going to like this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you took time to help out the podcast. How could you do that? Here are 3 ways. 1, tell a friend and share the links. 2, go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs associated with producing the podcast. Thanks so much. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
And this is where students will make their first impressions with you. You know, it's critical moving on to the next part of TSR, which is bonding. And in the bonding phase, this section takes up a lot of real estate in my book because it consists of what I call considerations that I feel are indispensable, such as your room environment, how we communicate, how we support student needs, and our level of inclusiveness.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Patricia Erbe, M.Ed., is an author and former educator in Pennsylvania's Westchester area school district, where she taught for decades at the elementary and secondary levels while also serving as a team leader, curriculum developer, science advocate, early field and student teacher mentor, and consultant to individuals and organizations for professional growth and practical teaching applications. In addition to these leadership experiences, she has bolstered her social-emotional focus by leading extracurricular activities and clubs for young learners and as a consistent and informal mentor for colleagues. Furthermore, Ms. Erbe has contributed to the community through her active involvement on the Westchester Area Education Foundation Board, a nonprofit dedicated to mobilizing community resources for student benefit, and the Hopewell UMC Preschool Advisory Board. As a member of the Pennsylvania State Education Association and the Association of American Educators, professional organizations, she finds staying connected to educational institutions and contemporary journals and studies critical in remaining current with educational trends and best practices. During her career, Ms. Erbe was awarded Best Teacher of the Year and has continued to work toward elevating student potential through relationship building and keeping up with current research and educational offerings. In addition to benefiting from numerous professional development opportunities, she has assisted other educational leaders in presenting professional development seminars. Ms. Erbe received her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Millersville University and a master's from Wilkes University, emphasizing educational development and strategies. In addition, she acquired a secondary teaching certification and has completed extensive coursework in social-emotional learning. Our focus today is Patricia's book, Building Bonds with Learners, the Teacher-Student Relationship Model. Patricia, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, glad to have you here, and I got to ask you this before we get into your book. What do you like best about being a teacher?
Oh, my goodness. There are just so many things, but I guess the biggest reason from a long list would be the aha moment. It's that moment when you realize as a teacher that you broke through, they understand what you're teaching, and a light bulb goes off and you can see it on a student's face. And a lot goes into that, but that one moment is why I became an educator and have loved it all these years. So I mean, I don't know what else to say, but there's so many things.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. That's, one of the things I miss most. I taught high schoolers and for a bunch of years. And one thing I always missed, never dull moment. And, they were fun. It was cool working on it and working towards these goals and stuff. So thank you for sharing. In the introduction of building bonds with learners, you note this: even though teaching is rewarding, we all know it can also be complex and daunting. Amid our daily activities and challenges, there is a tendency to neglect the monumentally important human element, the teacher-student relationship. Could you talk about what you wrote?
I feel that the teacher-student relationship model has kind of taken a back seat. In other words, it's something that we all assume or are expected to develop with students, and everything else is put forth in front of it, if that makes sense. We know it's there. We know we're trying to do it, but I feel that, and the research shows that that relationship tie with students is the most important thing. If you have that, the rest will follow, basically. I feel that sometimes we lose sight of that, and that is where we find our joy. That's why we're in it. In other words, we can teach the content, we can go through hoops, we can do a lot of things that we're expected to do academically and so forth. But if we're not addressing the emotional and maybe the social building that is part of that student-teacher relationship, I feel we're missing out, and we're trying to put the cart before the horse sometimes. So my feeling is that it should be a focus, a main focus, not forgetting everything that we need to do, of course, and that we're required to do. But point of starting should be that special relationship that you're building with your students.
Oh, that's so powerful. I mean, you're exactly right that, one of the most rewarding aspects of teaching is when you get to this point where they're getting it, but they're not getting it because you made them do it, because whether they admit it or not, they're getting into the topic or something, or the content or something that you're doing. And, because you're talking to a former history teacher, high school history teacher, and they would come in pre-programmed to say the following two questions: do we have to know this? Do we have to memorize dates? And do we have to read these chapters and stuff like that? It's like, oh my gosh, it's not about have to. So as a history teacher, you have to figure out how to connect with them so they get into because there's so much fun stuff packed into history that, it's like, they did this or, we're still doing this today. Have we learned a lesson yet? And anyway, my point is that that's what I pulled away from it, is that's, when you don't ignore the need for that relationship, when you're connecting with them, the kids want to do work. They work in they spend time with the content, and instead of do we have to, blah, 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 anyway.
I agree with you more. I mean, that I was world geography, so there we go. We're
Nice.
Connected that way.
Yes.
The first day of school, I could see their faces coming in. They're like, oh, we're going to have to learn every country in the entire world. And I just kind of played along with that by saying, I have to let you in on a secret. I didn't like geography when I went to school. Do you know why? Because there was an overhead. Do you know what that is? An overhead? And there would be transparency after. Do you know what a transparency is? I'd explain that one after the other, and I would just take notes all day. I said, we're not doing that here. And they're all like, yay.
Nice.
I hear you.
That's awesome. By the way, in college, I had a professor who, in a huge auditorium, it had 750 kids in it, and she would talk from one overhead and walk to the other one that had the slide on it already. She'd turn it on, and then she'd talk about that slide. Then she'd go over and she'd change the slide on the other one. It's like, oh my gosh, that was like transparency. Oh my gosh, it was just bleh.
Yep. Needles on fingernails on a chalkboard.
You got that right. All right, so why'd you write Building Bonds with Learners, the teacher-student relationship model?
Well, from an early age, I knew that I was going to write a book. I know that sounds kind of strange. I know other people have felt that they were called to do things as well. And getting into education, originally I thought, oh, surely it will be a children's book one day. And I have a few in my head right now that I've never written down. But after I had multiple years of experience, I realized that the heart of educating young learners is that critical relationship, which is, our responsibility to foster. And I began to research and see that it was more important than I actually realized it was. In tandem with that realization, through my career, I often found people, helping colleagues was a big thing. Troubleshooting their concerns about students, kind of bouncing things off me and talking to them, and mentoring student teachers from local universities. All of that made me realize that maybe I needed to write a sort of guidebook that focused on relationships to help people in the future, teachers in the future, with their journey as well. Because, I had 25 years of experience, which was wonderful. I just felt like I needed to put that wisdom out there and couple it, of course, with research and help others to be able to enjoy what I enjoyed throughout my career. I also wanted to share what had worked for me in the classroom. I have some definite, you probably read it in my book, different experiences that I had that I felt were important. It might inform those reading, help them in their journey as well. So I felt that there needed to be a prescribed way of connecting with students, not just willy-nilly. This year, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build relationships with all my students, something concrete. So that's why I wrote the book. Long story.
Very cool. And kudos, because, a lot of us want to write a book, but it never happens. So good stuff. One of the things that I'd like you to do is you talk about the teacher-student relationship model, or TSR. Could you do just a little bit about that? Just kind of describe it just a little bit so they get a feel for what you're focused on?
Sure. This is the constructed part of the book, the model, so to speak, that aids in developing SEL. The model itself is broken down into 4 main elements. The first is branding. And in branding, that's like the introductory place. It's a phase where you first meet your students and they begin to learn about you. It's a lot of teachers don't. I've talked to other teachers and they're like, wait a minute, what's a brand with teaching? And I said, well, it's similar to Amazon and Coca-Cola. Those companies have their own brand that we're aware of, how they market, so to speak. And I said, you also have a brand, I've told teachers, you also have a brand that includes your passions, your authenticity in that, and what you allow students to see. And this is where students will make their first impressions with you. It's critical moving on to the next part of a TSR, which is bonding. And in the bonding phase, this section takes up a lot of real estate in my book because it consists of what I call considerations that I feel are indispensable, such as your room environment, how we communicate, how we support student needs, and our level of inclusiveness, which all play into our ability to make connections. So I felt that I could just give the guidebook part on how to talk to students and how to go about meeting with them and all of that. But I thought, I can't assume that every teacher knows all of those considerations that go into that bonding part of the model. So this is where we, then the third element, which is the building element, is where we begin to build a plan, just like you're going to build a building. You have to have a plans in order to construct that. And that part is step by step, examples for you to go by. And then finally, just reflection, which is good practice for every educator professionally. And that is where we look at what worked, what didn't work, what will we change in the future. The entire model is constructed with a flexible guide and making a concerted effort to building positive and viable relationships for student success.
Very cool. And so we're going to dive into a couple of chapters here in just a second. And
Okay.
I just wanted to, by kind of previewing that model, they get kind of a taste of where we're going with this. So good stuff. Let's dive into these chapters. And for the audience, yes, I'm not going to go through every chapter, so you got to take a look at the book. All right. So, but let's start with chapter 1. Make the right first impression. All right. In this chapter, you say this: it is astounding how quickly students form opinions of their teachers. By the way, I'm starting to laugh because it made me laugh when I read this. Why did you say this, especially as a kickoff to the first chapter?
Well, I wanted to have a powerful punch opening there. So that's why I think it was further in the chapter and I moved it, as we sometimes do when we're writing.
Nice.
But basically, I found at least a few students every year. I taught middle school, 6th grade, my last assignment, and the classes change. And the first day of school, you have new kids coming in every 48 minutes. And it bothered me that some of them, usually at the tail end of the period they were in with me, I'd overhear them saying, some of them even said it to me directly. They said, well, I don't know about that other teacher, I don't get good, vibes from it. I like coming here. So I was like, how could they know that? I know my colleagues. I can't imagine any of them, saying or doing anything the first day but being absolutely nice to their students. So I started to research that and found out that first impressions occur within milliseconds, and future encounters then are either strengthened or they're changed. The perception then is also can be the same or changed too by the students. So we tend to think of what we say out loud and that is the basis of how we are perceived, but that's only the part, a part. I learned that body language speaks loud and clearly. For example, facial expressions, how we stand, how we position our arms and our body towards the class can convey messages. It is important to realize that that's a part of communication in building relationships. Take the teacher stare, for example, that everybody knows about. There's a perfect example of how negatively, our body language can affect students.
Oh, that's a perfect example because that's you have my all-time favorite is the teacher who I was the student. I was one of the students, but he greeted us with the following: "This is my classroom, and you will treat my classroom as my classroom," and blah 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 blah. I could go on a little bit more, but he's standing there talking about everything is his, and it was like, yeah, nice. That was a great introduction. But we did learn one thing, that it was the room is his. All right, so
that's the positive part, right? The room is his.
Right, exactly. But we walked away with that. It was pretty clear what he was saying. Don't mess up my room. But I've had other teachers who you remember fondly because instead you remember lots of stuff about them because they connected with the students. They had some activity. They didn't just go through a list of rules or something like this, and they did something to connect with you.
Something, yeah, that's the perfect thing. That's usually what most of my colleagues started out with, and you would think, but I think sometimes the little nuances, these kids don't miss anything. And especially the nonverbal.
Right. I have to share this because when I have a chance to talk with teachers, one of the things I encourage them to do is to sponsor a club or organization because that allows you to connect with kids further. And so as you're developing that teacher-student relationship, what ends up happening is it actually pays off for you in the classroom because they want to work for you and stuff like this. Well, one of those organizations that I did was Yearbook, and I was we did a lot of work on the weekends, did a lot of work after school, during school, stuff like this. And so they got to know me pretty well. So they took a chance one day. So in my world history class, a child asked a question. I taught 10th graders. A child asked a question that was really not a good question to ask in the class. And this was a senior who was making up a class that she had long ago failed. And so she's in there with all these 10th graders. And I'm like, how do I answer this question? And so I looked up at this window. And you need to know that there are no windows in that classroom, all right? It was, so I looked like I was looking out the window. And I turned to the class and I went, well, anyway. And then I moved on. And the young lady, she came to me later and apologized for doing that, and apologized to me and for disrupting the class and all that sort of stuff. And I knew she knew it was inappropriate. But what was funny was, so when I get to my yearbook class, they say to me, do you ever notice that, I don't know if they said it like this, I don't know if you know this or not, but when you don't want to answer a question, you look like you're looking out the window and say, well, anyway. And it was funny. So even when they graduated, on graduation day, they reminded me of this habit that I had. So, well,
anyway. But it's funny. Well, and you know what? That's kind of under your brand,
Yes.
It's what you're known for, right?
Yes.
And those students probably today remember, and they
Oh,
might not remember your name, but they will remember you saying that. You know what I mean? It's so impactful.
Yes, there are some of them that I have seen again when they're 40 years old, and they remember, goofy things like that, or and especially the ones in your book, because it's like why do you remember that? That was anyway, good stuff. So all right, so let's talk about this. I mean, because in this chapter, you have a reproducible, which I so much love. It's called Body Language Chart. And this chart is awesome. It has all these pictures in it, and I'm going to let you describe that. But it says, basically, I want you to tell us more about this. And not only that, it's a reproducible, which is really cool.
I will tell you about it. It was one of the hardest reproducibles in the book.
I can imagine.
It was hard. It was difficult to gather all that information. There's a lot out there on body language, pages and pages and pages, and many gurus have books out with those types of body language in them. So what I did was I took I took the most important ones that I felt an educator would be interested in knowing more about. And some were positive, some were negative in there. It depends on what picture you're looking at. And I guess, what are there, 3 pages of that in there, maybe, of reproducibles, I think? About 3 pages. And my intention is not for an educator to know all of those, but maybe just to pull out 5. Let's say start with 5 that you feel you would like to change or to hone or whatever, and practice them. Maybe alone, and then maybe then in the classroom, and do that until comfortable. It's just, it has to help and in conveying more positive messages. If you're aware, just having your arms a certain way can convey you're open or closed. So if you're building relationships, you don't want those arms to be in a position where students are looking at you and saying, this doesn't seem like a very safe place here, or welcome place, let's put it that way. And also the other thing that I address in there, that you can't really see that in the chart itself, but you don't want to have mixed messages either, where you have maybe your eyebrows are raised, but your mouth is in a way that looks like you're disgusted. So you can't, you have to learn those things. That reproducible is available on www.solutiontree.com/free-resources/SEL. Or if you would like an easier way, you can just go on to the solutiontree.com website and look for my book. I believe on the page where my book is located, Building Bonds, there are a list of all the reproducibles in the book that can be printed.
That's awesome. And I got to say, because my all-time favorite in there are the facial expression ones, because you have these characters who are doing these facial expressions. And there's two of them together. One is mid-raised, brows together, and upward, present astonishment or amazement. And then the next one, mid-lowered, brows pulled together, and downward shows focus or irritation. And, as an adult making those expressions, you really... it's something that you have to be careful of, because, no matter whatever you're talking about or doing, and whatever the child, however they react to what you're doing, you might be sending the wrong message, but not realizing it, I guess is my point.
Exactly. Right. That's very true. I'm curious, did you practice any of the facial expressions or any of the other examples on those pages, or?
The facial ones are things that I do not have a problem practicing, because all right, so now you asked, all right, because one of the things I have to be careful of is that I couldn't play poker. I have friends tell me all the time, they look at my face and go, yeah, what's bothering you? All right, or something like that. And then I also, as a kid and young adult, I used to practice something that I got to use a lot, because I like to, if you ever watch the original Star Trek series, Spock would raise one eyebrow. And
yes.
So I made that as my, kind of like something I always did. So yes, I did practice some of your stuff there, because I'm like, ooh, I could probably add that to my repertoire of looks. And anyway, but I love that. Did you take the pictures? Did you have the models do that?
I had help with the art department at Solution Tree.
Cool.
Yeah, they had, I had to describe what I needed, and then they had to secure the pictures for me. I had to prove them. It was a long process.
I can imagine. It is cool. And listeners, these pages are awesome, because it will remind you about, whether it's you making those expressions, or the physical gestures and things like this, or it's the child. I mean, and I think it's very powerful. It really sets a good tone with your book.
Thank you.
In chapter 2, Create Your Brand, you have a segment titled Infuse Elements of Yourself into Your Teaching. So what are you talking about?
There, I'm actually talking about, to infuse elements of yourself into teaching, you first must discover something personal about you that you are passionate about. In the book, I talked about a teacher who enjoyed sharing his ability and passion for reenacting. This is right up your alley because of history, right?
Right.
He enjoyed wearing period garb, such as important figures such as like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and he would wear those on special days when he was teaching something, I'm assuming, most difficult that would get their attention.
Right.
And he was just amazing at this. And kids would be, you could hear them in the hallways talking about it,
Cool.
Going to different classes. I could hear that. And I always admired that. I thought that was a really creative thing. Now, that's not something everybody can do. But that's something he enjoys, that is part of him. He enjoys enacting, and he brought it into the classroom. Another teacher I know loves sports, and she unpacked all of her bobbleheads every year of all these sports figures and put them on shelves in her room. The kids came in and they were just so enamored by them. But she said, my whole year is going to be like, I'm the coach, and I will help you, and we will work together as a team. And she really infused a lot of the sports elements into her whole year. And I just love that part of that. I mean, even if you're not someone who can think of some sort of passion that you have that you can infuse, but let's say you have a pet, even a dog at home, a cat at home, you can make that animal your class mascot and have it up on the well, up on the computer, on the smartboard or whatever as you're teaching, just something. Kids will love that. They'll look for it all the time. And it's some connection to you personally. When you let students see a glimpse of you, let them see some snippets, they feel more connected. And so that's another good way to build those relationships.
Oh, I love that, because that is so powerful. Because if at some point you can be you, it's because they know when you're faking. It's like that.
Yes.
Stop. Who are you? And
Yes.
that's cool. That's very powerful. So, all right. So, your book is broken into 3 parts: brand, bond, and part 3, building. Let's talk about part 2, bond. When you introduce this part, you say this: over time, as you reveal your brand to your students, bonding will follow. So let's talk about where that thought process is going.
Well, let's think of back to branding. Remember, before bonding, branding as the exposure of the first impressions and the introductory period where students begin to learn who we are. Okay. That's when the door is open. Bonding then is the process where we learn more about our students and they learn more about us. This is where we create the safe, respectful, and equitably charged learning environment. Where branding is the foundation, if we were building, I was talking about building earlier. So branding is your foundation, where they're sizing you up, so to speak, and you're learning a little bit of them. Bonding is really the brickwork. That's where you're starting to lay the bricks. And the chapters I wrote on bonding are those critical considerations. We can't afford to ignore the importance of palpable communication skills and an equitable and inclusive community if we hope to build bonds. Yeah. In chapter 7, I've included also in that whole bonding section, this one chapter 7, where there are actual accounts of students that I interviewed or asked permission to use their account. And this is the place where I drive home the importance of, community building, your classroom, the equity and all of that. And a lot can be learned from their experiences. I mean, when I was just overwhelmed to hear what they had to say. In some cases, it was something that might have been minute to an educator, but to that student, when I asked each student, what would you remember when you're 60 years old? And they came out with these stories, I was really blown away. We don't want anything to preclude us from developing significant ties. And I think that learning from their perspective is helpful. And so that's why that was put into the bonding section.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. It's everything that I'm reading in your book, it's focused on sharing why it's important that you make those connections. And I think that too often we forget why we became a teacher because of things that are driving us nuts or something. And I think it's important to remember that it's such an important part about it. You really can't separate the instructor from that connectivity, because if you do, then what happens is that, to me, what happens is that you're trying to just be an instructor, and it's not possible, because you're working with all these children, no matter what age they are, that they really want those connections. And even the ones who might, this is dumb or something like that, eventually kind of come around, which is kind of cool. So anyway, nice stuff.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, because my favorite chapter is chapter 4, and it's called Build Your Communication. In this chapter, you have a segment titled Educator to Student Communication. You note this to start the segment. Some ideas I learned throughout my career may be helpful for you in strengthening your communication and relations with students. I love this part. It's awesome. Could you talk about a couple?
Absolutely. I think when communicating with students, one of the hardest things is to admit when we've made a mistake. And in communicating under this section that is educator to student communication, I feel like it's really, really, really important for us to be able to be humble. Sometimes we need to step back. I'll give you an example. One time, I thought a student of mine was cheating on an online quiz. All indicators in front of me pointed to that conclusion. She denied it. And instead of me discussing the consequences on the spot, because I was upset about that, I don't know why, but I told her I would investigate it further and get back to her. Well, it turned out that there was a glitch in the program, believe it or not, and she was correct. She had not cheated. It turned out that taking the benefit of the doubt and trusting this student led to a very good teacher-student relationship of respect. And the whole year went well. Let's just put it that way. Another suggestion in that section is communicating with our students that I feel is so important is letting them know you're always available, even if you look busy. And I've been involved in coursework and trying to get things done, or somebody needs a report in the building now and they're working independently and you have to quickly get it there. And we always look busy, I think. And my students knew, though, that they could always put a note on my desk, send me an email, send me a message through the school platform that way if they needed me and I looked too busy or didn't have a moment for them. The key here is to make sure, and I did this, is to reiterate all the time that I had an open door policy and willingness to help frequently. And I was really open with kids. I would tell them, look, I'm working on this right now, or I have to work with this group of students over here. And I know I look busy, but I always have time for you. It may not be right at this exact moment, but I definitely will circle back and we will connect. Letting them know you have time for them helps to build trust and respect. And that has to be repeated over the years so they don't forget that you are available.
That's awesome. Because it can look like, that's, that you're unaccessible, but you're not. So telling them that is cool. I like that. All right. So part 3 is build. Could you share why this part is titled build? I mean, what specifically were you going for here in your third part?
Okay. Well, we talked about the foundation and the bricklaying. So this would be making it to our goal of completing the house, so to speak, if I can use an analogy there. Part 3 is just that. It's actually the accountability piece. And I mentioned earlier something about, you don't want to go willy-nilly through the school year saying, I'm going to develop relationships. You really have to have a plan to make it work. And we can say we interact with students, however, having a plan to spend moments with them over time helps us to be able to communicate with them on an individual basis. So I walk the reader through strategies on how to communicate with students, how to get to know them better, how to plan out time, the time management piece to facilitate meeting with them. And it seems so simple to say that, but also overwhelming at the same time. It's a simple concept, basically, but I've had people say, well, when am I going to have time to do that? And basically, it's not something that has to happen lickety-split. It's something that has to be planned out through a course of time that you are getting to know the children that you teach, and at the same time doing everything else in all the other chapters in the book. I know it seems a lot, but trust me, the planning is where it's at. We can't just go day to day hoping that we will be able to make an impact. The plan is where we need to go. And there is a reproducible on this that would be a good example of that. That you would be able to log all the interactions that you have with your students. And at the end of the day, say 3 months' time, you'll be able to say, oh, gee, I didn't get to everybody. Somebody's left out. So if you choose to use something like that, it's a tool. So I have tools in that section to help educators to be able to reach their students.
Excellent. So, I appreciate you sharing your book with us. We're getting close to wrapping up now. And but before we do that, Patricia, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
I am on LinkedIn. My email is PERBE. It's the first initial and then last name at Comcast.net. And also through Solution Tree, my publisher. You can, not that you'll be able to contact me through that website, but there's additional information about the resources and so forth of the book and the book itself.
Very cool. I'll have that information in my show notes, so it's easy to find and easy to connect to those different places. So good stuff. I got one last question for you, Patricia, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
That's a tough one. There are a number of I was blessed with a lot of wonderful teachers, let me tell you. I would say the one I will remember the fondest is Miss Clark, and that was in 5th grade. And it was the first time that I felt seen, if that makes sense. Her smile, her openness were, they were both infectious. I felt so valued. And the thing is, she didn't listen just to me. So it wasn't like a teacher's pet kind of thing at all. She listened to all the students. And it was not unusual to see her on the playground, with all the kids around her, wanting her to, be involved or just talking to her. It was the best year, and I know that I learned the most in elementary school during that year. She just drew me in. Yep, Miss Clark.
That's awesome. Appreciate you sharing that. Patricia, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, Building Bonds with Learners, the Teacher-Student Relationship Model. I love your focus. What awesome practical information for use in the classroom. So much to learn. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Steve.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.